I received a really good question about the difference between or the distinction between choosing to fast or isolate for 7 days. So let me read the question. How do you determine whether you need to do a 3-day fast or isolate for 7 days? What is the difference? I'm familiar with fasting, but not as familiar with 7-day isolation. I know it was established in the Old Testament when someone had a rash and was set outside of the camp. How does that look today? Okay, so they were not set outside of the camp until, so they're only set outside of the camp if they came out of that isolation and had not returned to God. It was not evident that they had returned to God. And by evident, I mean whether or not they had started healing. So let me just kind of go over it. In Leviticus 13 and Leviticus 14, the word talks about a rash, and it also talks about a mold being in a house. Now look, we didn't have all of these diagnoses. We didn't have all of these illnesses at that time, because God established an agreement with his people that if you obey what I have said, I won't put on you any of the diseases that I put on the Egyptians. And he held true to it. So, medicine wants to tell us that, we have less diseases now. Really? I mean, why is the DSM getting thicker and thicker with every publication? Society is not getting better because medicine and psychology and the scientific field is doing us such a service. We're getting worse. And the reason we're getting worse is because we're not returning to God, because we're spurning him for idols in medicine and in the sciences. He already told us that he doesn't yield his praise or glory to idols. So that's the condition of things. And much of this is spirit possession. Jesus told us ahead of time that it was going to be spirit possession. He said, so it will be with this generation. When a spirit goes out of a person, it goes through arid places looking for rest, and it comes back to the house, finds it swept clean and unoccupied because they haven't returned to God. They're not fanning into flame his Holy Spirit. And therefore, that spirit comes back and brings with it 7 more spirits more wicked than itself. So it will be with this wicked generation. So that is what we're dealing with. I don't care if it sounds woo-woo to you. It's what Christ said. You either believe it or you don't. In Leviticus 13 and 14, they did not have all of the diseases and illness that we have today for that very reason. So God did not have a need to go through all of our DSM criteria and whatever other diagnostic criteria we have. I mean, I don't think he's ever going to have that need because these are man-made explanations for what's going on. But also because he hadn't sent all of that on us yet. So he was simply establishing, here's how it works. If I send this rash, you go to the temple, the priest is going to take note. He's just simply going to observe the symptoms of what's going on. Now you might say, well, isn't this the early makings of science? No. Science puts their own spin on things. I have no problem with observation. Observation is just common sense. You don't need any degree for that. You just need what God gave you, 2 eyes and a brain, maybe a hand to write down the symptoms, okay? So the priest would take notes of what was going on with the person. How deep was the rash? Was it superficial or did it go deeper? Was there white hair, black hair, fluid? Then the person was told the same remedy every single time. Go into isolation for 7 days. And the person would go into isolation for 7 days. What do you do in isolation? God already established that with Passover. You go in, you shut your door, hide yourself for a little while till his wrath has passed by, right? That's isolation. Rid your house of yeast. So a person would have understood what they were doing in isolation. Same thing with a house. If a house, and you are a house, so don't think that the house is supposed to repent. You are a house, so he was helping you to understand by this metaphor of sending mold to a house. The priest went in, took note of what was going on, closed up the house, isolated it for 7 days. After the 7 days, if the house or the person were not getting better, then they were cast outside of the camp. So not before. Then they were cast outside of the camp because they were demonstrating the fruit of one who had not returned to God. So there's an implication there that there's some responsibility that God is placing on you. Otherwise, he wouldn't punish you by sending you away from your people. That person was cast out of the camp until they started demonstrating the fruit of one who was healing. There is an implication there that you have responsibility in your healing. Why do you think Satan set up a field where you take no responsibility for your healing? You just go to someone who tells you how to heal, a fake remedy for healing, or pours chemicals down your throat, or they take responsibility based on what insurance says. they're going to treat you with. You are abdicating control over to something else to heal you. It's completely against, in opposition to what God requires of you in your covenant. So if they didn't heal, they were cast outside of the camp until they demonstrated that they were healing. If the house wasn't healing, then the stones, every stone was taken down and cast outside of the camp. You understand the symbolism? Because he uses that symbolism later on. Not one stone will be left on another. You defile yourself and you refuse to return to him, not one stone will be left on another. So how do we understand this today? The solution to everything that God is sending in your life is to return to him, period. That's the solution every time. If I have something, by the way, this is an observation. If you have something that is contagious or potentially contagious, you have a rash that perhaps is contagious, you don't know, you have a cold, and you kind of know when you're contagious. Like you kind of know when you're germy like that. It's logical that you need to go into isolation. Not for the reasons that the world tells us, but you shouldn't be out if you're bearing the consequences of being defiled inside. You shouldn't be hanging out with other people. You should be getting your stuff together, and then you can be around other people. Otherwise, if you've got spiritual stuff going inside of you, you are running the risk of presenting a stumbling block to others experiencing that same defilement. You have something going on inside of you, that is going to affect other people. They have something going on inside of them, that's going to affect other people. So why do you think God established, because he's the one who established this, contagion? He's told us to surround ourselves with people with whom we are in agreement. And if we're not, that's going to affect us. He wants us to know that. And the same goes for you. If you're working something out spiritually, you need not be around other people. You need to just go into isolation with God. So the question is, how do you know? How do you know if when you're fasting, when you're returning to him, when you're receiving from him, how do you know if you need to be in isolation? Well, the way that I know that I need to isolate is if I'm sick, if I'm bearing symptoms of potentially being contagious. And I usually know by that time what God is dealing with me on. Like the couple of times that it's happened was one, when the whole construction situation happened and I made that decision apart from God. And the next time it happened was when I made a commitment that I was, obviously going to observe Sabbath. But I also made the commitment that I wasn't going to go try and control this situation by the work of my hands. And I went out and tried to control it. And the interesting thing that I was thinking of, earlier is that some of the things that I have done, some of my sins, I think those are so much worse than, going and making a unilateral decision or desecrating God's Sabbath and, breaking that agreement. Some of the things that I do, I think are worse than that. So he also is demonstrating to me what is most important to him. If I make a commitment to him, that's important. And I think we all need to understand that, because we make commitments to God and we say, I promise I won't do it again. And then we're like, well, just a little. No, our commitments are serious. We should not be making those commitments if we're not going to follow through on them. And there's times when we're really willing, right? Like we're dealing with all those consequences that he's sending us and we're really willing and we're begging him, please send this away. I promise I won't. Then he sends it away and we forget that he's sovereign. And we forget that we're laid bare. And we forget that he can send it right back. So, both of those times I had broken a covenant with God. I broke the agreement that I made with him. And I have to be prepared that when I make a commitment that I'm not going to break it, he's going to send me another test to see if I will actually break it or keep the covenant that I made. So be prepared for that as well. Okay, so the remedy to everything is always return to God. Always return to God and he will heal you. The rule of thumb for isolation is if you think you're contagious, you need to go isolate. But you're doing the same thing in isolation. You're returning to God. Regarding the 3 days versus the 4 days, all I was pointing out on a previous video is that in these major situations, God restored me he didn't restore me to fully on the 7th day, but by the 7th day, I was already getting better. And so what the word says is you go back into isolation for 7 days. Please, please don't make this a list of do this and do that. And don't put it on your spouse. Well, now you need to take care of everything in the house because I'm going into isolation. Don't be ridiculous, please. All I was doing in that video was noting that God has, made me better by the 7th day, then I need to go back into isolation. So simply what I'm doing is I'm still saying hi to my neighbors. I'm still going outside and, I did some work in the yard and I talked with one of my neighbors for a bit. But I'm not doing things like, last week I canceled an appointment to get my hair cut. It was not a good idea for me to be around another person when I am in this defiled state. God is dealing with me. That needs to be the priority right now, that I am being dealt with, that I am, listening to what he's communicating to me through my body. If I live with people, I'm not going to go run into the next room. You can isolate in God without having to be physically isolated from the responsibilities you have with your kids and to your family. So you got to sort this through with God. I also, there have been times where I started to get something and he restored me sooner than 7 days. What God has taught me is that the sooner you learn the lesson, the sooner he will relent. He's taught me that since the very beginning when he first started healing me. The sooner you learn the lesson, the sooner it'll go away. But you got to truly learn it. You got to truly rend your heart. And so it's a good thing. Like I'm remembering when he was first teaching me this, I was in excruciating pain. I mean, I was at that point where I was dying. My bones would ache, for no good reason. I couldn't even get comfortable. You know that feeling of when your bones ache, or your muscles ache when you have the flu? I felt like that all the time. Painful. You can't even get comfortable. And so when you're feeling that and he's not relenting, you learn how to bring your heart into position real quick. You learn that you're not going to be able to fake this. That's a good thing. Don't think that that's a bad thing. That's a good thing. He wasn't giving me more grief than was necessary. He was giving me just enough grief to make me understand what needed to happen inside of me. So rend your heart to him. Don't make this a list of do's and don'ts. Just remember what he has already established and bring that into your understanding of how you need to return to him. If he's sending you contagion, you need to isolate. You need to get in deep with him. If he's sending it for multiple days, because he's sending you something every day. So if you're doing this work every day and you're paying attention to your body and your mind and your feelings and your dreams and your memories, you're going to be attuned. You're not going to get sick as frequently because you're dealing with it on a daily basis. So if you do get sick and you notice that he's sending it for several days and you're like, well, I already dealt with it on the first day. No, he's dealing with you every single day. Keep receiving it. If you're sick right now, if you have something that, some sort of disease, same principle applies. The other thing I want to tell you is by the time you're, in bed and in pain, God has likely been trying to deal with you on something and you've been running. And or you did something in direct defiance, like my situations where I made this covenant and then I said, hey, you're not doing things quick enough. I'm making a unilateral decision to step in. Oh boy. So you're not answering to me. You answer to you and you answer to God. It's not going to change anything in my life. You need to simply be honest with yourself about whether or not you're doing this. And everything's laid bare before God. So if he's sending you consequences and they're not going away or he's not relenting, remember what he says. Remember what your fate is. If he did this with the Israelites where he established something like this, and they were sent outside of the camp if they weren't demonstrating healing. Listen, I know people get ticked off that I say this, but hello, are we talking about the Bible or not? This is what God established. This isn't something I'm making up. It is a destructive teaching to teach people that, disease and illness are just random. That's destructive. God is sovereign. He's doing something here. Pay attention to what he established. If something's going on in your body and you're not healing, you need to return to him because he's capable of healing you. The other thing that I would say is, or the last thing that I will say is I don't think that it necessarily has to be 7 days. If God is putting it on your heart that it needs to be 7 days, this last cold that I had, I felt like I kind of knew that it was going to be about 7 days. And it's honestly, to me, it's really miraculous and amazing that on the seventh day, I'm already feeling okay, I'm on the mend. And now I just need to finish what he started. But pay attention to your relationship with God. That's more important than going by some 7-day rule. Pay attention to what he is calling you in on. Keep receiving him on a daily basis. Keep letting him deal with you. Actually, there's one more thing that I want to say. The last thing that I want to say is about fasting. With fasting, you need to be paying attention to, is God calling you? Is there something that you're doing, you're getting too far from him? He's been dealing with you on or convicting you that you're engaging in technology too much, you're eating too much, you're, whatever it is that's going on. The question that you need to be asking yourself is, does my physical flesh need to be disciplined? My mind and body? Where am I getting undisciplined? And where do I need to circumcise? So if I've been eating too much and I keep doing it and I'm not able to get this under control, or I'm eating too many carbs or something like that, then I know that I need to fast. I need to deal with what is it inside of me, what's going on with me that I'm needing to distract in that way. I need to remove the idols and return to Him. Fasting is largely a checks and balances to make sure that you are placing God first, that you're not reconnecting. And remember, the flesh is like cunning. It's insidious. It'll connect you to all of these sinful idols, your computer, phone, food, things that are, sort of seem like they're innocuous, but the flesh will reconnect you to it. It'll get its tentacles back on you. And so it's important that you're doing regular fasting so that you're attuned to, am I living in the heart and spirit? Am I connected to God? If I'm feeling separated from God, then I need to examine, all right, maybe it's time to do a fast. The isolation obviously has to do with contagion, illness, disease. You still might need to do a fast. In fact, you likely need to do a fast. So isolation is not something that always needs to be done, but fasting is. Fasting is something that needs to be done on a regular basis. I hope that's made things clear. If you have any questions, put them in the comments. Also, I would really appreciate it if you would like the video. That helps the algorithm, only if God is testifying to what I'm saying. And in that way, you have the ability to affect the accessibility of the message. God bless you, and I'll see you in the next video.